Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Stu Clark. Today we're going to look at how to set your backyard up as a bird photography studio. If you're new to bird photography, you see a lot of these, professional quality photos and you're looking at them like, how the heck did they do it? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be some sort of setup, whether it be a blind setup on, on a kill site, whether you're in your backyard setup, which is what we're going to be kind of focused on here. In the wild, if you're going to be setting up on a pond or a little, anywhere there's water, will be a huge attractant to birds in the summertime when it's really dry. So a lot of what we're going to cover in this series is really going to pertain to all of that, but it's nice because we're going to talk about in a nice, something that where you fully control your situation, like I said, with your backyard setup. Today we're going to start with the ground feeder setup, and this is going to be the first part of this studio setup. When you're setting up in a studio, coming out here was a process. I had to bring the lights out with me, different cameras, different things set up, trying to take advantage of a different situation compared to shooting in my office or shooting in the field. Whenever you're doing this sort of setup, ease of change is a huge part of what you're trying to do. So what we're going to look at is that when you're setting up your backyard setup, whether you've got like the cedar wall of cedars that I have, or even a fence, what's going to happen is the birds are going to stage. They're going to have a comfort zone. So in my front yard, I've got a choke cherry where all the purple finches like to sit. So whatever it is, you've got some sort of a higher perch that's going to be their preferred safety zone where they're going to stage from. So when we do this whole studio setup, it's trying to take advantage of that. I said, I've got a wall of cedars. That could just as easily be a fence line. If you're, imagine a bird, you think, well, how is a fence safe? Well, if a predator comes in, the bird can go one side of the fence or the other to kind of dive out of the way of it. Anytime you've got a high structure, a tree, a hedge, a fence, that's going to be kind of your anchor point for your studio setup. And what we're basically going to be doing is we're going to be talking about how you're going to get from your anchor point to staged perches to the feeder. It's how do you take the best advantage of that? First off, we're going to start with an awesome ground feeder. So this one, like I said, Colin makes these in his shop up at his store in Nanaimo there. So you want to start with a really nice, solid ground feeder. And you want to make sure it's got a really nice mesh to it. That's got quite a tight weave on it so that you don't have seeds falling through. So you can put a lot of ground feeders like things like millet. I put sunflower. I'll actually shave suet into it as well. That way you get some of the fat content, and that works super well as well. But you want to make sure you've got a really nice tight mesh to it, and you want to make sure it's easy to clean. So this is made of cedar with a nice mesh tray in it. So it's very easy to clean. You can definitely get some recycled plastic ones. There's different options for the feeder setup that you can do. Thanks to Colin for providing this one for this video. Once you've got your setup, it's not just a matter of putting the feeder in the middle of the yard and having birds just kind of flock to it. That's not what we're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create some staging. And by doing so, we're going to block off some of the access to the feeder, because you can imagine if you've got the feeder on a tray set on the ground, you're going to have towhees and fox sparrows are going to approach from the ground. They're going to approach low and then just jump to the edge of the feeder. You're going to have chickadees. They're going to fly in and land on the edge of the feeder, and quickly everything just goes right to the feeder. So if it's going to come from their safe zone in the trees, they're going to go right down to the feeder, grab some seed, and fly off again. So what we're trying to do today is this is going to be the first part of the studio build out, is that what we're trying to do is limit some access to the feeder zone. We're going to block off the coming to the feeder from either side. So we're going to create a wall that the birds can't just kind of get, and sometimes you get seed will be knocked off. So we want to make it so that they have to jump up onto the feeder setup. And ideally we're going to have perches along here, or rocks or moss or something that they can land on, some feature that we can photograph them on. instead of just having them land on the edge of the feeder, and the photographs on the feeder are not what we're going for. We're going for that interesting perches with the really nice blurred out background. So if you watched the previous video, we talked a lot about distances and distance from the feeder setup to the background setup. And that's a lot of what is going to happen here. Is we want to make sure that you've got the background perfectly blurred out, but then we've got perch options for them to land on before jumping onto the feeder. And by blocking off a little bit of the access to the feeder, we're going to make them stage a little bit so that, you can definitely have 3 or 4 birds in the feeder itself, but the 5th, 6th, and 7th will start to have to sit on perches and wait a minute. So that's the ideal situation where as the birds fly out of the safe zone, they're going to land on one perch, which is going to have a certain background. They're going to land on a second perch, and then the birds coming up from the sides will also have perches to land on. And we're going to make it so that wherever they land, you've got a perch option that it works really well for photographing. And what's ideal is, you could definitely put rocks and things on a feeder like this, but then it becomes a lot more difficult to clean. Now, a feeder like this, you want to give it a good power wash, once a week sort of thing. You want to give it a good clean out, get rid of any of the old seed, especially if you're feeding sunflower in the shell. You want to make sure all the shells are removed from the feeder. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to create a slot where this feeder will slide in underneath the setup, so that you can just pop the feeder out, give it a good clean, and your setup will stay in place. And then the setup is basically, you start the day, you can go find some nice logs, you can go find a couple perches, and it's just a matter of, you can swap things out on the setup. It really opens up your creativity with your bird photography. And I think when you start doing this sort of, like I say, you start taking advantage of the studio settings, you'll learn so much that when you go out into the field, you can really a lot of the same principles will apply, where you've got a nice safe zone, perch you can actually take a small tripod and set perches up from it as the birds are staging into a pond or a little water, a puddle even in some situations. So this is where this setup photography will become the backbone of a lot of your bird photography. So it's a great starting place where, because you've got full creative control of it, you can really start to, take your photography to the next level. So what we're going to do is, first off, we need to create a tray system that basically is elevated above the feeder itself. And the reason I've had it before where I just make one flat tray. The problem is you end up with bird food getting quickly scattered into the mosses on any sort of your setup. You quickly end up with bird food on it. So it's one thing in photography, if you're going to do any videos, you really don't want to have just a lot of mess in the setup. So by having the perch setup elevated a little bit above the feeders, you're hopefully going to eliminate some of that mess. Obviously, birds, when they're jumping out, will be dropping seeds and things like that. So you will have to brush off the setup every once in a while, but this will help to, it'll alleviate some of that. It'll definitely make it a little bit less of a continuous mess. Basically what we're going to do, we want to set up platforms on the edges for feeders, for setups on the edges. So any of your ground feeders jumping up, you've got something where they just can't jump and pop up to the edge of the feeder. They've got to jump up onto a little bit of a rocky perch. Again, you're not going to go super elevated here, but you want to make it so that you've got something for them to land on. And ideally what we're going to do is we want to make it so that anything on the perch on this side is not obstructing anything on the background. On that one, you're basically going to have different perch zones that you're going to line up with your camera, and that you can set it up, and that when things jump onto it, you hopefully you're really set up for each individual area as its own photo zone. And then what we're going to do on the back side, we're going to actually attach some quick change perch setups. So we'll have one of the things I've already kind of cut up a little bit here. So what I've had, this is a 4-inch piece of ABS piping here, and you can see how I've drilled it right out. I've cut a notch up top here, and I've got half of it cut away here. The idea behind the half-away cut is that I can put this perch stop in, that if I put a perch in here, it can only go down so far. So that way you can see how it can only go down so far. And if I've got a longer perch and I don't want to cut it, I can just drop it down to the lower one. So basically, we're going to set this up on the back side of the feeder setup here. So the idea behind this is that, you know, a lot of what we're doing when we're dealing with, we're going to have kind of bark faces. So you'll have some of the perches will actually just be a big piece of bark with some moss on it. So that's something that we've got it set up that it can just slide in here. And then we've got all kinds of screw holes where I've drilled it out all the way around that we can then anchor it in place. So when you're dealing with a lot of these setups, you know, a lot of the moss will be, it'll be a partial log that's mostly rotted out. So having some sort of support as opposed to just screwing it in, to when you try and just screw it into place, inevitably everything starts to fall apart and crumble. So you want to have some sort of notch in place, just to make your setup easier to change around, where you're not constantly kind of drilling through, having it break apart on you. So having some sort of support, and this was an idea I just came up with recently, where this will allow me to really kind of anchor everything in place a little bit easier. As you can see, I've got tons of screw holes throughout. So this way I can anchor it from different angles depending on the shape of the log or the bark, what you're putting in here. This will kind of go on the main right-hand side. That'll be kind of the, I'll have a tall one, which is going to be partially a suet log, and that'll be kind of in the next episodes. But for this one, we're looking at kind of the ones that are going to be anchored off the feeder itself. So we'll probably have, this guy will be up to about a foot. And then we're going to have a lower perch, which will most likely be a rock or a mossy log that'll just go right across the back. So we have this one will be kind of anchored about here. We have another lower one and then two on the sides. And so we'll have kind of four perch setups that'll be coming off of this feeder setup here. So what we've got here is a 1x10 board. This is what we're going to use for the platform area around. And one of the things that you could just use little 2x2s or things like that as posts. But basically what we're trying to do by putting flat edges on it that go to the ground, we're trying to get those towhees and fox sparrows and the ground feeders to jump up to the feeder system as opposed to just kind of sneaking underneath it. And if you had certain things where you weren't anchored to it, they'd end up jumping underneath. And this way this will force them up onto the feeder setup and to get some, hopefully some nice shots of them. I noticed it a lot when I was doing the varied thrush video a few weeks ago. The fox sparrows never came onto the feeder setup. They would come up, they'd go low. They'd just do a quick jump right onto the feeder, grab a seat and be gone. So I never actually got any shots of them, which is unfortunate. So this is where, like I say, you're trying to, depending on what species you've got coming to your yard, you're basically trying to funnel all of the birds onto perches and then into the feeder setup, and then they're going to be quickly jumping away. So the more we can kind of funnel them to where we want them to, the better your shots are going to be. And this will then apply coming down the road. We're going to also do this for a water setup as well. That'll go alongside this feeder setup. So, okay, so let's kind of take a look. We'll kind of go through some of the build on this to give you an idea of how I'm going to build it all. So what we're going to want to do is you want to make it so that, like I said, that you're going to close it off from three sides, but you want to make it that we can just slide the feeder in and out from the one angle. And that just makes it a lot easier to clean. So that's really important when you're doing this, is that, like I said, this is about a studio setup. So you think when you walk into your home studio, anytime you're in a studio setup, it's quickly change this, change that. You can quickly move things around and change them all. And that's the idea with this, is that this is simple, easy, quick changes that can completely change your setup and how it looks. You know, come fall time here, my grass will be all yellow as we get to that. You know, hasn't rained for a month or two. I could actually change this to make it almost look like a desert setting, just based on the fact that they've got a nice bright yellow background. You can completely change what you're looking at depending on the background, the time of year, and everything else. So that's where having this, being able to move it all around and change it, is really important. So basically what we're going to do, we're basically going to create three sides to this whole unit. So basically we're going to use the the 1x10 to create 3 sides around the unit. We'll put a strap across the front. I do have to keep in mind, especially depending on where you are, I've got deer and raccoons. I looked out the other day and a deer was standing on top of my whole setup. So you do have to keep some of that in mind, depending on what critters you've got coming to your yard, and that you will need to build the setup structurally accordingly. Like I said, I couldn't believe the whole deer is standing on top of it. So I don't want a deer standing on this. So hopefully we can avoid that, but you never know. It is what it is. So these create the pocket holes. So it's a really nice, durable way of drilling them out, nice and clean. Definitely going to overbuild this, like I said, with having deer and raccoons in the yard. Want to make sure it's got some decent strength to it. So you can see now how it's easily, the feeder can slide in and out. So basically the front of the edge here is going to be the front of the bench. So this will be kind of sitting in, this will actually sit back. And that way the birds have to jump up and over as we want it. Okay. What I'm doing here is just putting some extra support on the side bit. Just to give me a little bit more purchase so that I can screw in a board a little bit easier there. Okay. The idea about having these offset is that I have a perch here. I'm hopefully not getting the background of this. That'll allow me to kind of offset the perch a little bit on the edges there to kind of help to give me a bit more angle on that side. That's the idea there. Again, I'm way overbuilding this, thinking that I'm most certainly going to have deer climbing on this. So that's my thinking here anyway. Lastly, we just need to attach the perch setup to the side here. When you're doing your setup, you need to make sure that where your anchor point is, so where your anchor setup is, you're going to be bouncing down the feeder setup. So this will be the high perch that we're going to put on the right-hand side because I've got the cedar trees, the row of cedars on the right-hand side. So that'll be kind of the bouncing down. So we'll put this, we're going to mount this to the back of the setup on this side here. Anything you do when you're setting up the setup, you want to make it as stable as possible. Right now, I notice this has got a little bit of a rocker to it, so I definitely want to stabilize that. Reason being, you don't want, as the birds are landing, you don't want the system moving and rocking. One, it'll scare them. Two, you just don't want to have any movement in it. The sturdier it is, the better, for sure. I just got the long drill bit that goes right through. And then we can anchor this in place on the back of the feeder. Excellent. So you can see now how I've got this attached at the back. It's attached nice and firmly on the back of the setup here. And this has got lots of holes in it that I can basically fix anything to it, slide the post in. And yeah, so we are good to go now. Awesome. So we're out here in the yard. We have got the whole setup, got the whole platform all built out here, which is just great. So now we're just going to anchor it down to the feeder setup. So we give everything a good power wash out here. Like I said, we're basically going to strip everything clean here. So you can see how the setup here, the perch holder on the back there, which platform kind of fits nicely on the bench there. And then this just slides right in tight underneath there. So this allows us, we get a really nice, good feeder setup. There's lots of access for the birds, and then the feeder is nicely in place there. Okay, excellent. So what we're gonna first do, we're gonna just anchor the platform down to the bench. Pre-drilled a couple holes in it here, just to give me something to anchor to. Because we have the deer coming in here, we are anchoring it a little stronger than you might need to. Just want to make sure that it doesn't tip over if we have some nighttime visitors. Excellent, so that's solid now, which is great. Perfect, so that easily in and out, but this is anchored down, so we don't have to worry about that tipping over. So now we can do some set up some of the perches on it and kind of give you an idea of how we're going to set this all up. We've got the blind set up here. So you can see we've got the blind set up here that then we're going to shoot. You got the center post here, which is going to be kind of, I got this amazing, just went and found this amazing perch for that. So you can see how this will just slot in place here. And it gives me an awesome little perch for the birds to land on. Okay, so we're gonna have a setup here where you can see, you can already see how nicely that perch will line up with the grass there. Really intricate mosses on it, really cool. So yeah, so you can just, this is kind of the angle we're gonna be shooting through, and we're gonna basically set up the different perches based on different spots, and then we're gonna set up another high perch off of the platform there. We just took that one down, it was well worn. Okay, so let's find some stuff to put on here, and then we'll kind of get it set up and have a look through it. And if you're wondering where all the moss comes from, my yard grows moss-like grass. What we're going to try and do is we're going to basically try and cover all of the wood with moss so that we're not having any bright spots shine through. So when you're setting the moss up, you want to make sure you're finding mosses that are on a similar angle, so that it's natural looking. You're not dealing with, you don't have it growing the wrong direction for how it would show on the feeder itself. Clean it up a bit. So you can see where there's some dark showing here. You want to try and eliminate any of the dark bits as best you can. just so you're not having real dark contrasty parts showing up in the shot that you're then having to Photoshop out of it. Just take that out of the way. When you're trying to put different mosses in, you want to try and blend things in as much as possible. You want to try and, we're just going to try and cover up as much of the wood showing as we can. So now you can see anything approaching from this angle. It's got a nice perch to land on there. That looks really beautiful. We need to get a little bit of moss on that. So you can definitely get creative at this point. Put some into the background a little bit. One thing when you're doing anything like this, remember that the birds are small in the frame, so you don't want to be putting in, an actual size salal leaf by comparison is huge. So the bird, you get a junco beside that, it's not nearly. You want to make sure that the little pieces you're picking are suitable to the scene. So you can see now how we've got shooting lines where we've got a really nice perch there. We've got a nice mossy rock, awesome log there. So when I'm with the big camera, I've got some really nice, and then a little bit of the ivy there, I think it is at the back, just to really give you a really nice scene. Okay, very good. Let's put some food out and see if any birds show up. It's actually haven't had very many birds this last week. Ever since the snow disappeared, everything's back in the woods. So we'll get the set up, and hopefully we'll see some birds start showing up in the next couple days, and then we'll get out here and do some shooting right on. Well, thanks for joining me today. I hope you got some good info out of this one. It's a little bit disjointed with getting the setup going right now. I don't have a ton of birds in the yard. It's been a bit of a strange season. We had ton of activity when the snow arrived, but since the snow's gone, everything's kind of left again. So we'll get this set up. We'll get a bunch of food put on it, and hopefully we see some good birds show up in the next few days. We can get out and shoot this and for part 3. Right on. Thanks for joining me. Take care. Till next time. See you out there.